The trail wound through towering pines, their ancient trunks standing as silent sentinels. The forest was alive with the sounds of nature, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of a bird, and the soft crunch of John's boots on the forest floor. Each step he took seemed to echo in the stillness, a reminder of his solitary journey. Sunlight filtering through the canopy created a mosaic of light and shadow on the ground, a natural tapestry that shifted with the breeze. The dappled light played tricks on his eyes, making the forest seem both inviting and mysterious. John, burdened by a heavy backpack and a heavier past, welcomed the solitude. The weight on his shoulders was more than just physical, it was the accumulation of years of regret, mistakes, and lost opportunities. Yet, in this moment the forest offered him a reprieve, a chance to breathe and reflect. He yearned for peace, a chance to outrun his demons. The forest, with its timeless beauty and serene silence, seemed to promise that elusive peace. Each step he took was a step away from his past, a step towards healing. The woods promised sanctuary, a place to heal. The towering trees, the whispering leaves, and the distant murmur of a stream all seemed to conspire to create a haven for his troubled soul. Here, he could find the space to mend, to rebuild. Each step took him further from the city, further from his nightmares. The distant skyline, barely visible through the trees, was a reminder of the life he was leaving behind. The further he walked, the lighter he felt, as if the forest was absorbing his pain. John inhaled the crisp mountain air, feeling it fill his lungs and invigorate his spirit. The scent of pine needles was sharp and clean, a stark contrast to the polluted air of the city. It was a reminder of the purity and simplicity of nature. The scent of pine needles, sharp and clean, brought back memories of simpler times, of childhood hikes and carefree days. It was a sensory connection to a past that seemed distant yet comforting. His phone, usually a tether to his chaotic life, remained silent. He had turned it off, choosing to disconnect from the world and its incessant demands. In this silence he found a rare sense of freedom, unburdened by the constant notifications and calls. He had told no one his destination, seeking complete isolation. This journey was his alone, a personal quest for peace and clarity. The forest, with its endless trails and hidden corners, was the perfect place to lose himself, and perhaps find himself again. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of hope, a sense of peace settling over him like the evening shadows. The forest, with its timeless beauty and serene silence, was beginning to work its magic, helping him to heal and find his way back to himself. As the evening shadows lengthened, John felt a profound sense of calm. The forest, with its ancient wisdom and quiet strength, had given him a gift. It had shown him that even in the midst of solitude, there is a path to healing and hope. The silence was shattered by the buzz of his phone. A text message flashed on the screen, an unknown number. "Beautiful day for a hike," it read. John frowned, dismissing it as a wrong number. He shoved the phone back into his pocket, eager to return to the peaceful rhythm of the trail. Another buzz. "You seem lost," the next message stated. John stopped, a shiver crawling up his spine. He glanced over his shoulder, scanning the empty trail. The woods seemed darker now, the silence heavier. His heart pounded in his chest, a sense of unease settling in his gut. He quickened his pace, the message replaying in his mind. The sun dipped below the tree line, casting long, eerie shadows across the path. The forest, once a place of solace and tranquility, now seemed to whisper secrets of an ancient past. The air grew colder, and the once vibrant colors of the leaves turned into ominous shades of gray. John had always loved the woods, but tonight, they felt different. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. John jumped at the snap of a twig, his senses on high alert. He had been walking this path for years, but tonight every sound seemed amplified, every shadow more menacing. He tried to convince himself it was just his imagination, but the feeling of unease was growing stronger with each step. The snap of the twig echoed in his mind, a stark reminder that he was not alone. He scanned the area, his eyes darting from tree to tree, searching for the source of the noise. He could have sworn he heard footsteps, heavy and deliberate, following his own. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. It was as if someone, or something, was mirroring his every move. He quickened his pace, hoping to outdistance whatever was behind him, but the footsteps only grew louder. The forest floor, covered in a thick layer of fallen leaves, seemed to muffle his own steps, but the ones behind him were clear and distinct. He felt a chill run down his spine, a primal fear taking hold. His hand instinctively reached for the pocket knife in his backpack, a meager comfort against the unseen threat. The cold metal of the knife was reassuring, but he knew it would be of little use against whatever was out there. He had brought it along more out of habit than necessity, but now, it felt like his only lifeline. He gripped it tightly, his knuckles turning white as he continued to move forward. The forest seemed to close in around him, the trees forming a dense wall that blocked out the fading light. His phone buzzed again. "There's no use running," it taunted. The message sent a wave of panic through him. How could anyone know where he was? He hadn't told anyone about his plans to take a walk tonight. The message was short, but its implications were terrifying. He glanced around, trying to spot any sign of movement, but the forest remained eerily still. The phone buzzed once more, and he hesitated before looking at the screen. Another message: "We see you." John spun around, searching for the source of the messages. His heart pounded in his chest, and his breath came in short, ragged gasps. The darkness seemed to play tricks on his eyes, shapes and shadows shifting in the periphery of his vision. He called out, his voice trembling, "Who's there?" But there was no response, only the oppressive silence of the woods. He felt a growing sense of dread, as if the forest itself was conspiring against him. The woods were silent, save for the rustle of leaves in the wind. The gentle breeze seemed to carry whispers, unintelligible but haunting. He strained to listen, hoping to catch any clue that might explain what was happening. But the more he listened, the more he felt the weight of the forest's silence pressing down on him. It was as if the trees themselves were watching, waiting for him to make a move. The once familiar path now felt like a maze, each turn leading him deeper into the unknown. But he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, hunted. Every instinct told him to run, but he knew that would only make things worse. He had to stay calm, think clearly. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. The feeling of being watched was almost palpable, a constant pressure that made his skin crawl. He turned slowly, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, only the oppressive darkness and the ever-present rustle of leaves. His sanctuary had transformed into a menacing labyrinth, the darkness closing in around him. The path that had once been so clear was now obscured, each step taking him further into the unknown. He felt a growing sense of panic, but he forced himself to keep moving. The forest seemed to close in on him, the trees forming a dense wall that blocked out the sky. He knew he had to find a way out, but every direction looked the same. The whispers in the woods grew louder, a constant reminder that he was not alone. A blood-curdling scream pierced the night. John froze, his blood turning to ice. He recognized that scream, a woman's filled with terror. His mind raced, torn between the instinct to flee and the urge to help. He hesitated, fear battling with his conscience. Another scream, closer this time. He couldn't ignore it. He broke into a run, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The undergrowth tore at his legs, branches whipped his face, but he pushed on, the woman's screams fueling his desperate sprint. He had to reach her, had to help. He burst through a thicket of trees, coming to a clearing. It was empty. The only sound was his ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of his heart. John scanned the area, searching for any sign of the woman, but there was nothing. Had he imagined it? His phone buzzed. Looking for someone, it mocked. John whipped around, his eyes darting back and forth. He was surrounded by trees, darkness pressing in from all sides. He was trapped, a pawn in a twisted game he didn't understand. Panic welled up inside him, threatening to consume him. He had to escape. He took off running again, this time without direction, driven by pure terror. He scrambled up a steep embankment, ignoring the burning in his lungs and the scrape of rock against his skin. He had to gain higher ground, had to get away from the messages, from the unseen terror that stalked him. Reaching the top, he risked a glance back. In the distance, a pair of eyes glinted in the moonlight. He wasn't alone. The figure was too far to make out details, but the sight of those eyes, cold and predatory, sent a fresh wave of fear through him. He turned and ran, fueled by a primal instinct to survive. He ran until his legs gave out, collapsing on the forest floor, gasping for breath. His body ached, his clothes were torn, but he was alive. He had escaped. Pulling out his phone, he frantically dialed for help, his voice shaking as he relayed his terrifying ordeal. The operator's calm voice on the other end was a lifeline. They pinpointed his location, assuring him help was on the way. As he waited, huddled beneath the vast, indifferent sky, John couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't truly safe. He had escaped the woods, but the woods hadn't finished with him. The fear lingered, a chilling reminder of the night he became prey. They found no trace of the stalker, no evidence of the woman's screams. The forest, once a place of serene beauty, had turned into a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig seemed to echo with the memory of that night. The search parties combed through the dense underbrush, their flashlights piercing the darkness, but it was as if the forest itself had swallowed any signs of the terror that had unfolded. The air was thick with an unspoken tension, a sense that something was watching, waiting. The police dismissed it as a prank, a cruel joke gone too far. They chalked it up to overactive imaginations fueled by the isolation of the woods. Reports were filed, statements taken, but there was no follow-up, no deeper investigation. To them, it was just another case of campers spooking themselves. But for those who had been there, the fear was all too real. The officers' skepticism only added to the frustration and helplessness felt by John and his friends. They knew what they had heard, what they had felt, but their words fell on deaf ears. But John knew what he had experienced. The memories of that night were etched into his mind, vivid and unrelenting. He could still see the flicker of eyes in the darkness, feel the oppressive weight of being watched. The forest had come alive with a malevolent energy, and he had been caught in its grip. Every time he closed his eyes, he was back there, surrounded by the towering trees and the suffocating silence. It was a nightmare he couldn't escape, a reality that refused to fade. He had seen the eyes in the darkness, felt the stalker's presence closing in. It was a sensation that defied explanation, a primal fear that gnawed at his sanity. The eyes were not just watching, they were probing, searching for a way into his soul. The feeling of being hunted was inescapable, a constant reminder that he was never truly alone. Even in the safety of his home, the memory of those eyes haunted him, a ghost that lingered in the corners of his mind. The woods held secrets, dark and sinister, that he couldn't explain. There were stories, whispered legends of spirits and shadows that roamed the forest at night. John had always dismissed them as mere folklore, tales to scare children. But now, he wasn't so sure. The forest seemed to pulse with an ancient malevolent energy, as if it were alive and aware. The twisted roots and gnarled branches seemed to reach out, trying to ensnare him, to pull him back into the darkness. It was a place where reality and nightmare blurred, where the line between the living and the dead was perilously thin. He returned to his life, to the city, to the noise and the crowds, but the solace he sought remained elusive. The bustling streets and the constant hum of urban life were a stark contrast to the eerie silence of the woods, but they offered no comfort. The city, with all its distractions, couldn't drown out the memories. He found himself drifting through his days, a shadow of his former self. The laughter of friends, the chatter of strangers all seemed distant, hollow. He was there, but not really present, lost in a world of his own making. The woods had seeped into his dreams, the feeling of being watched a constant shadow. Night after night he would wake in a cold sweat, the echoes of his own screams ringing in his ears. The dreams were vivid, relentless, dragging him back to that night in the forest. He would see the eyes, feel the presence, and wake with his heart pounding, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Sleep offered no respite, only a temporary escape from the waking nightmare that had become his life. He had sought peace in nature, but found only terror. The forest, once a sanctuary, had become a place of dread. He had gone there to escape the pressures of life, to find solace in the embrace of nature. But instead, he had found something dark and unexplainable. The tranquility he had sought was shattered, replaced by a fear that clung to him like a second skin. The forest had taken something from him, something he wasn't sure he could ever get back. The experience had changed him, leaving him wary, haunted by the unseen. He moved through life with a newfound caution, always looking over his shoulder, always on edge. The world seemed different, darker, as if the shadows had grown longer and the nights colder. He was haunted not just by the memory of that night, but by the knowledge that there were things in this world that defied understanding. The forest had shown him a glimpse of the unknown, and he could never go back to the way things were. He was forever changed, a man marked by the darkness of the woods. Years later, John still felt a shiver run down his spine every time his phone buzzed. He avoided the woods, the memory of that night forever imprinted on his mind. The peace he sought remained elusive, replaced by a constant low-grade fear. He had outrun the stalker, but the experience had left its mark. The wilderness, once a symbol of escape, had become a symbol of his vulnerability, a reminder that some wounds never truly heal. He had gone into the woods seeking solace, but emerged forever haunted by the chilling truth that sometimes the monsters are real, and they lurk in the shadows, waiting for their moment to strike.